What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham G.S. Matthews, break down all the original content you watch on the WWE Network, on Peacock, and on Vice. As today we're talking Season 4, Episode 7 of Dark Side of the Ring, Abdullah the Butcher, Legacy of Blood. Certainly not the strongest episode they've done this season, if not ever. Not an episode I was really looking forward to. I know who Abdullah the Butcher is, obviously. I know a little bit about his story, the Hannibal stuff from over 10 years ago. He doesn't come across great on the show. On this episode does Abdullah, nor does Hannibal. I mean, he just comes across like a piece of shit. Not just on this episode, but really just in general from everything I've read about him, seen from him, heard of him, whatever. Specifically with the story, thankfully, that they covered on this episode about him and the referee and busting him open, bloodying him up, which was very similar to story what happened to him and Abdullah that is also covered on this episode. I'm glad they covered the Hannibal story from a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, because it's pretty fucking disturbing, and despite all that, I don't think he's really been blackballed from the business. I think he still wrestles. I mean, he still does a lot of shit. I see him on fucking YouTube all the time. I've tried to block out those videos because he interviews people, and they're not really good interviews anyway. So anyway, this episode was really about them and Abdullah's bloody career and kind of where his life is now in terms of just not doing well physically or, personally or financially or whatever. So it's an interesting episode. I really didn't care too much about this one. It wasn't like I was won over by the end of it. He's still alive, so that's a plus as far as, a lot of the people that cover on the show aren't alive anymore. That's not the case here. I guess Marty Jannetty would be another one. They're covering him later on in the season, and he's still around, thankfully, for now. But yeah, I guess just he was able to tell his own side of the story, so it made it more interesting, and he could defend himself and kind of talk about his own side of things and his own perspective. Still, I would not call this one of the better episodes this season so far. They open up the episode with Mick Foley, actually, who's been on a few episodes so far this season, with him talking about how he would idolize Abdullah kind of growing up in his career, to the point where when he got to college, he found out about Abdullah from magazines, wrestling magazines. That's how word spread to him. And he worshipped him as a wrestler so much that when he got to college, he put up pictures of Abdullah in his dorm room and told people that was his father. We hear from Hugo Savinovich, the former WWE commentator for the Spanish announce team, pretty notable name. He said that no one was safe from Abdullah the Butcher. We hear from his sister, not Hugo's, but Abdullah's sister and brother, and they recall where they lived and their rough upbringing. His real name is Larry Seaver or something like that. So I forgot his last name, but something along those lines. But his real name is Larry. He talks about how his parents worked really hard. His mom had to work on the ground and clean stuff on her knees and hands and stuff like that. She worked really, really hard to provide for their family. And to kind of help with that, he sold candy as a kid. He dropped out of school in the 2nd grade. So he never even finished 2nd grade, and that kind of comes into play a little bit later on. He worked a lot of different jobs after that, including running a karate place for senior citizens that can defend themselves. And then he was convinced later on through this karate place by someone that he should join the wrestling business. He said, that shit ain't for me. And then he was told about how much money he can make by doing it, and he was like, all right, I'll consider doing it, because he was all about the money. He couldn't really learn English, apparently, not as far as speaking it, but in terms of writing and reading and stuff like that. But he did know all about money, and that really helped him a lot, I guess, throughout his career, obviously, because he made a lot of money. He learned from the Sheik, and that was kind of where his hardcore persona came from, and busting people up, and bloodying people, and cutting himself up and shit. His dad told him to get out of the business. He thought he was fucking crazy. Abdullah busted himself open in front of his father to kind of show him, hey, look what I could do, sort of thing. And the dad thought he was nuts, and understandably so. Abdullah wrestled in Puerto Rico, Japan. That was really where he kind of made a name for himself, in addition to the States, obviously. He made a lot of money, like I said. And he even gave some of it to his family to kind of provide for them. He got his mom retired, so she didn't have to be on her hands and knees anymore cleaning shit up. So that was nice, I guess. And he, as a result of the fact that he wasn't really, taught anything, he didn't make it through school. Like I said, he dropped out of 2nd grade. So as a result of that, he kind of blames that and his lack of schooling on the fact that he doesn't know who's working with him and who's working against him. And as far as how he's doing now, he says he's in real bad shape. Mick Foley says that a lot of people probably don't know where the person begins and where the wrestler begins, as far as what the difference between the two is. And we hear that a lot about these people on Dark Side of the Ring. We hear from his caregiver, who talked about how she met him giving out food at a homeless shelter, and Abdullah gave her a pamphlet for his restaurant, like a Chinese food restaurant. I don't know where this would have been. and she brought her son there. And the son recognized Abdullah, like he was one of his favorite wrestlers, because I guess he really liked the heels or whatever she said. We hear a lot from Tony Atlas on this episode as well, and he said that Abdullah did a great job of always getting his opponents over. If you wrestled Abdullah, you would be very well known the next day. And he was also a really, apparently, which I didn't know, a very big part of Japanese culture. He was in commercials, he recorded a fucking album. He was very popular over there, and that's where he made a majority of his money. And this is where they introduce Hannibal, Devin Nicholson. And he considered Abdullah a mentor. And Abdullah even says that they were friends, he worked with him, he's a promoter, blah, blah, blah. So they go over Abdullah's shtick in terms of cutting people with forks, which is so fucking stupid. I can't believe they're still using. I mean, I know they're not probably doing it actually nowadays, but we just saw the whole fork nonsense in AEW and Blood and Guts like a week ago. Like, why are we still even teasing this nonsense? Again, it's probably not even real as far as they're not actually cutting themselves with the fork, but it's still pretty fucking dumb. But Abdullah bled every single night, they said. And as a result of that, that kind of prevented him from going to WWE, because Vince knew he'd be a liability. They recall some incident that he was on a TV show. He was on some sort of like talk show with Hannibal off on the side, and he put the TV show host in a headlock, like legit, and he was almost going to bust him open with a fork. I thought this was going in a very different direction, and he started putting like food in his face and shit, like really roughing this guy up, and the guy was kind of like laughing nervously, and he actually cut him open a little bit in a cut above the eye, and Hannibal kind of crashed it and made it more into a joke because he knew Abdullah had to be stopped, because otherwise this would go too far. So pretty weird. That was in 2009 apparently. It was around that point apparently that Hannibal, and I remember reading about this at the time. I didn't know who Abdullah the Butcher was. I didn't know who Hannibal was, but I remember reading this in my early years of wrestling fandom on the dirt sheets and stuff, that he was offered a deal by WWE in 2009. He had done a lot of like dark matches with them and served as an extra and whatever. He signed with them that same year in 2009 until they rescinded the offer when his blood test came back and they found out he had hepatitis C. And after doing some digging and after having some initial suspicions, he found out he actually got it while he was wrestling Abdullah, who also had the same rare case of hep C. Abdullah was dealt with a lawsuit from Hannibal, and according to Abdullah, he couldn't read the lawsuit, so therefore he lost the case by default in Georgia and I think Ontario or Windsor, whatever, because he didn't show up. So he lost the case. Hannibal won, according to the news clipping, $2.3 million. But he says that he's never gotten a dime of that because he can't provide for himself, let alone for other people. Can't Abdullah. Tony Atlas says that Hannibal could have cut himself. He says that Hannibal shouldn't be owed shit. He kind of knows the profession that he was getting into, and he had Abdullah cut him because he couldn't do it himself, and he should have known what he was getting himself into. Like I said, Hannibal says that he hasn't paid anything, that Abdullah hasn't paid anything. The caregiver talks about how Abdullah doesn't have any money to even fix up his own house and kind of do what needs to be done and take care of himself, let alone pay any money to Hannibal. Abdullah says that he should have gone to school. That's his biggest regret. And Hannibal says, listen, he can read and write. He dealt with contracts. I've been with him. He's read menus before. He's written me letters and stuff like that. So I know he can read and write. That's what he says. Foley says, listen, and other people back that up. Hugo says, well, listen, I never knew that. That second grade teacher should be founded and commended because they taught Abdullah a lot, apparently, because he can read a menu. Foley even says, well, not to sound like a joke and not to sound like I'm kidding, but I've been out to eat with him and he can read a menu. So he can read some stuff, but not other stuff. I mean, that's a little questionable. They talk about how wrestlers back then would suck blood out of the heels' heads, which is so fucking gross, Hugo talked about. And Abdullah says it was all about the violence back then. That's what people wanted to see, blah, blah, blah. So like I said, they covered the Hannibal incident from 2021 when he beat the fuck out of a referee and bloodied him up and cut him up and shit. Even though the guy had, like, really, really hurt him. And then they showed pictures of his head and how they had to be stitched up and stapled and stuff. Like, really, really gross stuff. And they talk about, he gives his own side of the story as far as what happened. He doesn't really seem to show any regret. But they kind of talk about the incident. They have him explain it. And that's really about it. I mean, they talk about it, but it's like, whatever he did was pretty fucking gross. We also hear clips from like Lance Storm and Wrestling Observer Live and radio and whatever. And he talks about how Hannibal should be banned from the business, which I don't think has happened. I think he's still taking bookings and doing shit like that, which is fucking wild. I don't think he was even put in jail or had to do any time. I think the whole thing blew over, which is pretty remarkable in a bad way. But that's wrestling in a nutshell, I believe. Hannibal says he was eventually cleared of the hep C, He ended up taking some experimental stuff and was cleared of the Hep C. And he says, as far as Abdullah, what he could start doing is just start paying. Start paying what you owe me. And they talk about, due to some like technicality in the legal system with what happened here, that Abdullah was found liable, but not guilty. So they talk about how he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2011, which I thought it was 2010, but I guess it was 2011. I'm pretty sure, I mean, you can look this up. I just forgot to do so before I hit record here. I'm pretty sure I remember reading a story at one point talking about how he sold off his Hall of Fame ring. I know the Paul Bearer sons did, and which I thought was pretty fucked up because, like, the dad died. Paul Bearer wasn't there when he was inducted, but the sons who inducted him on his behalf ended up selling off the ring, I think. And I think Abdullah did too. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure he did, which would make sense if he needs the money. Then he probably did a long time ago. Anyway, they talk about his legacy. To close out the episode, Foley said that he will be remembered for always making it look like he was fighting for his life, something, that sort of legitimacy that is missing from the business today. The caregiver says that he should be remembered for the positive and not the negative, and Abdullah says that he wants respect after he's gone, and what people think about him is up to them. So, that was the episode in a nutshell. Abdullah the Butcher, Legacy of Blood. Not my favorite episode. I hate all the fucking blood stuff and the forks and the cutting. It's just not my cup of tea. They do at least one episode about this sort of stuff, like a season, I feel like, between the GCW crap with the GCW guy. I forgot his name at this point, but you know who I'm talking about. The guy that was on Dynamite a couple years ago. That and like some of the other promotions they've covered, it's just not my cup of tea. But even the story itself, like, he just comes across like a fucking idiot because he claims that he can't read or write and he couldn't read the lawsuit, but Hannibal's also a piece of shit, so you don't really come away from this thing feeling really bad for anyone. I mean, it's a sad story, but not for like, oh man, I feel so bad for him. I don't really feel bad. He's just an idiot. I don't know. It was a very interesting episode, to say the least, to kind of close it out on that note. But that was Abdullah the Butcher, Legacy of Blood, Season 4, Episode 7 of Dark Side of the Ring. Thank you guys for checking out my review. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. More Dark Side of the Ring reviews coming in the weeks to come. I think Bam Bam Bigelow's next week. And then after that, we have a Marty Jannetty episode still to come, which is probably closing out the season, I would imagine. As well as a Bash at the Beach episode from 2000, which, not really sure why that warrants a Dark Side of the Ring, but it should be interesting nonetheless. So, looking forward to that one in a couple of weeks. Thank you guys, as always, for checking out these videos. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content, including all my Dark Side of the Ring reviews, down below in the description box. Have a great one, guys. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll catch your ass down the road.